Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Valinteshley Pierre and I am a senior mechanical engineering major here at Florida Polytechnic University. This summer I had the privilege of conducting research at one of the top institutions for graduate biomedical engineering, Johns Hopkins University. And in there I worked in the Translational Tissue Engineering Center under Dr. Grayson. Dr. Walton Warren was my PI this summer, and his lab is the lab for craniofacial and orthopedic tissue engineering. Now, you might be thinking, okay, you are a mechanical engineer, what are you doing research in biomedical engineering? As I've come to learn that there are a lot of overlap when it comes to mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering, and of course with other engineering disciplines as well. This summer, my main project that I worked on was seeding cell-laden hydrogel into craniofacial scaffold. Now, the reason we did this, the current gold standard that people now use is the use of the free fibular flap, which you can get from the fibula, and they use that to basically create a construct that they can implant inside a patient with a craniofacial defect. So this patient right here had a piece of the left mandible missing. And what they did was they 3D printed cutting guides, and from there they can implant these bones right there into the jaw. But as you can see, it is not a perfect fit at all, and you can only imagine how a person's face will look when the skin absolutely covers it. So there are a lot of drawbacks, and these are patients that probably got these injuries from accidents or from surgical resections, or many of them were born with congenital defects as well. So some of the drawbacks are there is a psychological and a physical impact, and that is a concern for the patient. Because also one of the things that patients care about is aesthetics, how they look. If you imagine a piece of skin going over that bone right there, it won't look the way you and I look. You know? So patients are actually concerned with that. Also, something known as donor site morbidity. Basically, you have to have a secondary surgery, because to remove the fibular flap right here, you have to have the surgery. So that's an extra surgery that you have to have, and it can make a lot of patients immobile for an even longer time. So not only do you have this defect in the cranium, but you also have a defect in the leg as well. And also, when you're using, sometimes people use titanium implants, but with that, you can get, there is tissue necrosis, so the tissue starts to degrade because titanium is not a biodegradable product. So there can be problems with that, and with ceramic implants, over time they may degrade in a very unnatural way, and they may even produce toxins that the body cannot handle. So recently, clinicians and scientists have been collaborating together to advance tissue engineering and to treat patients specifically for their specific injuries. And so far, the lab that I worked in, what they worked on is they basically 3D printed scaffolds to be used for craniofacial reconstruction and regeneration. So basically first, they get the CT scan of the patient itself, and they can isolate the defect and create actual implants. From here, they can create actual implants, and from there, these implants can be generated as a CAD file. And these CAD files, and through some programming that we use in MATLAB, we're able to convert this solid material into a porous material that is then 3D printed. And the type of material that they use is a hybrid material known as PCl-DCB hybrid. PCl, which is a polymer, is polycaprolactone, and DCB is actually it's an organic material found in the body. It is decellularized bone matrix, which is basically bone that has no cells in it. So we have to go through this, the bones have to go through this cleaning process first, and all the cells are completely removed from it. And then it is crushed down and it is cryo-milled so that it becomes fine powder. And they mix that in with the PCl powder, and that's how they create a hybrid material that is then 3D printed. And also a very important step of that, you can't just stop there, but the scaffolds go through a process known as seeding. Seeding is when you implant cells and other biological factors inside these scaffolds because you not only want it to look aesthetically good, you want bone regeneration to occur. So seeding, when cells are inside the scaffold, they proliferate, they differentiate, and they cause bone formation. Also, what the DCP allows as well, it promotes something called osteoinductivity, which is the ability of the scaffold to produce bone, and also osteoconductivity, because it grabs cells from adjacent bone to help the scaffold produce even more bone. There are many different types of seeding techniques. One of the popular ones is static seeding technique, where they actually take the cell culture and they just place it on top of the scaffold and they wait for it to permeate through capillary action and gravity. There's also vacuum seeding and there's also rotational seeding. But these techniques, they become a challenge. They work well for cylinders, but it becomes a challenge when you have an anatomical shape. So say if you have a shape of a mandible, you can't necessarily just put some cells on top of it and wait for it to proliferate because it is not uniformly shaped. So with that, also, the reason that we're using the hydrogel to seed these scaffolds is the hydrogel provides an environment to encapsulate the cells. So the cells are not only on the scaffold itself, but they are suspended in between the pores, which is essential because you want nice and even cell distribution throughout the scaffold in order for bone regeneration to occur and in order for bone regeneration to occur properly as well, because you don't want new bone forming and there is an area in the scaffold that has no cells in it. There will be an anomaly, and it would also ruin the structural integrity of the new bone tissue formed as well. So my objectives for this summer, I was to create a protocol to efficiently seed scaffolds with the cell-laden hydrogel in an OR setting. What the researchers wanted to do was they wanted the ability to seed scaffolds right there in the OR, right before it's implanted into the patient. And my hypothesis is that delivering the cell-laden hydrogel in aliquots or in small pieces ensures an even distribution of cells throughout the scaffold itself. My goal for this project was to achieve 90% of the pores of the scaffold filled, very homogeneous distribution of hydrogel within the scaffold, and delivering the hydrogel in small amounts at different areas of the scaffold to get even distribution, and the process must be able to be repeatable by anyone. Because they want it done in an OR setting, surgeons must be able to repeat this process. It must be very easy, very simple, and very quick. So this is a seeding protocol that I came up with. First of all, using MATLAB code, we generated 3D constructs, and using the FPM 3D printer, we were able to print out cylinders. And then was a technique that I come up with is in order to seed the scaffolds, what we do is we have the hydrogel and the cell in a syringe, and we want to actually inject the scaffold. Initially, what I found out was that the hydrogel would just sink to the bottom or just seep to the side. So I thought, okay, what if we wrap the scaffold itself? Initially, I tried using parafilm just to wrap the scaffold, and it worked perfectly. But the problem is, these things, they have to be very sterile to take inside the human body, and parafilm is not something that can be sterilized. So we needed something that can be sterilized. So I used PETFE, which is polytetrafluoroethylene, which is basically Teflon tape, to wrap the scaffold all around, and then inject the hydrogel inside the scaffold itself. I use PTFE tape because it can be sterilized using different sterilizing techniques that they already use for the instruments inside of the OR. And from there, also I use a blue dye so that we can better visualize the distribution of the hydrogel within the scaffold itself. And from here, you see nice even distribution throughout the sides, nothing seeping out throughout the side, and even inside the scaffold, as you will see, there is nice even distribution. So I had to create different study groups in order to meet my objectives. So one of the first study group was creating heterogeneous scaffolds. These scaffolds, when they are 3D printed, they won't always be the same porosity. You may want them at different porosity or different pore sizes. And the reason for that is because you may want one side of the scaffold to be stronger than the other. So with that, these scaffolds, first we did a bound retest. We tested the extremes. The pore sizes on this was 500 microns with 40% porosity, and 1,000 microns with 90% porosity. And of course, we tested the heterogeneous scaffolds, which has two different porosities, 50% and 80%, 40% and 90%. And from that, we obtained data, and we can see that we have nice and even distribution. This right here shows the percentage of pores that are filled. So what I actually had to do was go inside and count each individual pores that I saw the dye had done inside, and put that over the total amount of pores to get a percentage of the total amount of pores that were filled. Also, I cut the scaffolds in half, and I counted the pores on top, in the middle, and at the bottom. And this is where we get this result from. And from here, we see that there are a nice even distribution, and even within the middle of the scaffold, the hydrogel permeates straight through. Most of the pores are filled when it comes to the middle of the scaffold. But we do have a bit of trouble when it comes to the top of the scaffold, because some pores fill up faster than others, so the bubble comes up and you're wasting hydrogel. So I had to make sure that I completely wrap the scaffold so that whenever the bubble comes up, it just permeates through the top. That way we get even distribution throughout the entire scaffold. Another study group was, I just worked with varying the porosity, varying the pore diameters, just creating those groups just to test different conditions, because they print scaffolds of different porosity and different pore sizes. So we want to ensure that regardless of the porosity, regardless of the pore size, regardless of the orientation, we can successfully get even distribution of the hydrogel within the scaffold. And these would be the results for it as well. Also, we have to look at the seeding technique. This is important because when you have scaffolds that doesn't necessarily have a uniform shape like this, you're going to be seeding from different directions. But we have to ensure that regardless of the direction that you seed from, that there will be even distribution of the hydrogel within the scaffold. And also, I tested foil paper as well, because that can easily be autoclaved, it can easily be sterilized. And we wanted to see if it would be easier to use that instead of having to wrap the scaffold in PTFE tape. And from the results, we saw that with the foil paper, especially when it comes to the top of the scaffold, there is not a nice even distribution of the hydrogel within the scaffold. And also the foil paper, it would actually leak because it's not tightly packed. But the PTFE tape performed very well in that aspect. So we decided that we will continue to move forward with that technique. Next, so they work with cylinders. What about anatomical shapes? So these are actually actual patient data. I can show you this because they already published some of these, so this is fine. So we have a CT scan of the patient. We isolate a specific defect. For this one, we isolated the zygoma. We use MATLAB code to create a 3D rendering, STL file. We also use another MATLAB code to make this, you can't see it too well, but to make it into a porous material. From there, we 3D printed this material, and then what I did in this technique was that the hydrogel that I use is called agarose, and which has a consistency similar to the hydrogel that they will be using for the other studies that I'll speak on further on. And I infused those, inside the hydrogel, I had suspended fluorescent particles. And from there, so I did the same technique. I wrapped it around in a PTFE tape, and I injected the scaffolds with the hydrogel, and I cut cross sections, and I analyzed under a inverted microscope. And from here, you can see the white dots you see are the fluorescent particles within the hydrogel itself. And we got exactly what we're looking for, because we have nice distribution on the scaffold, and you can't see too clearly here, but there is actually fluorescent particles that are suspended between the pores itself. So we were able to obtain even distribution with different shapes. We did a frontal bone, and we also did a piece of the mandible right here. And with all, we were able to achieve even distribution of the fluorescent particles within the scaffold. So now we had to kind of step it up a bit. We were using agarose and fluorescent particles, but now how do actual cells work with this technique? So we isolated pig and human stromal vascular fraction, which is basically cells that you get from liposuction, from human fat. We can isolate those cells. So we isolated them from pig and from human. So we actually had pig fat, and we isolated cells from those. And we actually had human fat as well, and isolated cells from those. But this is the seeding technique that I came up with. This is my lab mentor working on the seeding technique. First, we mixed the cell with fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a gelatinous liquid that we will use to seed the scaffold. So then we mix fibrinogen with formalin. The challenge with this is we have about 30 seconds before the gel solidifies whenever you mix the fibrinogen with formalin. So that's why we have to deliver it in small amounts. So he uses the mixture in a 10 millimeter syringe, and he injected the scaffold. For this one, we used just a regular cylinder scaffold because we ran out of time to print actual craniofacial scaffolds. And then we stuck it in an incubator, and and then we stuck it in an incubator, and then we waited till the next day so that we can analyze. The scaffolds, after we stuck it in the incubator, the next day we took him out and we cut out different cross sections of them, and we wanted to analyze those to see how exactly the human and the pig cells just distributed between those. So the scaffolds underwent diapy staining. The diapy staining basically fluoresces the nuclei of the cells. And on top here we have the human cells. This is a nice close-up. As you can see, the cells are nice and suspended within the hydrogel. They're also on the scaffold itself for the human and for the pig. The pig seems a lot less because we didn't anticipate that the pig cells would be so little, but we still were able to get nice and even distribution of the cells, the little white dots within the scaffold itself. But we were extremely proud of what happened with the human stromal cells. So we found out that we were able to obtain very homogeneous distribution of the cell-laden hydrogel using this technique. So using the hydrogel technique with the cells suspended inside of it and delivering it into small quantities. Reasons for other inconsistency in the data could be because of the irregularity of the print. Things don't always come out perfect, especially in 3D printing. And the environment wasn't entirely controlled, so the temperature actually affected how the scaffolds were. So what's next? I actually won't be doing this, but whoever comes after me will be doing this. They want to study how exactly the cells proliferate and differentiate. That means the ability of the cells to stay alive and to grow within the scaffolds themselves. So using the seeding technique, they will actually incubate the scaffolds with the cells inside of them, and they will test them after a period of time, after 6 days, 14 days, 21 days, etc., to see exactly how well the cells survive using this technique. The cell viability is something that's very important because if these are being implanted inside patients, you want the cells to continue to live on because that promotes vascularization, which provides nutrients to the scaffold, which induces wound formation. Personal project that I was working on, I actually wanted to do some CFD analysis, computational fluid dynamics, to analyze the permeation of the hydrogel within the scaffold itself. But writing code to simulate a MATLAB takes a very long time, and I was still learning it. But I got as far as letting the MATLAB code. I created the MATLAB code, and it's able to create 3D model, and from there I can do different analysis. I did some thermal analysis on it, but the fluid analysis would have taken a bit longer, and I did not have time to actually do that. And next, what the lab is currently working on is a pig study. So this technique, they will be using it on implanting. They will actually take out a piece of a mandible of a pig, and they will implant it with a 3D printed structure, and they will seed that as well. And they doing that so that they can analyze how well does bone formation occurs, and does vascularization occurs, those blood vessels start to connect, because that's the main reason that the cell is there. Did I meet my learning outcomes? Yes, I did. I conducted research at a graduate level, and I produced data, and at the end of the internship, I actually gave a poster presentation as well. I was able to familiarize myself with research and engineering techniques, scaffold design and 3D printing, working on project proposals. I had to do daily lab reports. I did a lot of MATLAB programming. I did not expect that. I did a lot of MATLAB programming. And of course, data analysis with information that we get from the analytical instruments that we use there. Also collaborated with grad students and contributed to their overall research project. I worked with one of the grad students on making a filament extruder. The hybrid material that I spoke about at the beginning, the PCL-DCB, they actually made their own filaments for that. And I helped design an enclosure to help control the temperature of that so that they can get nice and even strands of the filament itself. Cell culture, isolated cells from human fat tissue, which they use very actively in their research. And I also did micro CT using mimics. I isolated blood vessels. So they have these scaffolds that they implanted inside mice, and they basically analyzed the amount of vessels that are formed over time. And so using that 3D software, I was able to isolate the blood vessels within those scaffolds, and from there they can determine how well does vascularization occur depending on which treatment they get. And also, one of the coolest things that I think I did was creating implants for patients. I can't show these pictures here for obvious reasons, so I use one of the old pictures. So we actually got patient data, actual CT scans of the patient with different type of craniofacial defects. Some were missing mandibles, some were missing part of their frontal bone. And one of the things that I was tasked with was actually creating these implants. So what we would do if someone, for example, is missing a mandible or is shattered, we remove all the excess debris. We take the other mandible that's intact, we reflect that image, and we align everything, and we create that into an STL file. And in the Mimic software, we can actually create fixation plates that we can fix to here and to there. That will also actually be 3D printed so that they can implant these successfully. And from there, from the STL file, you can plop that into our MATLAB code, and it becomes a porous material that you can then see. So what did I learn during the industry? I learned you can't be afraid to fail. I did not expect it to be so difficult to see the anatomical shapes, because the cylinders are very easy with the anatomical shapes, because they have different permutations and different stuff like that. It was sometimes hard to get the needle inside there. So I had to change it up. I had to figure out a way around that. And also initially, before I discovered the PTFE tape, I had trouble seating the scaffolds. I had trouble with the hydrogel staying within it. So you can't be afraid to fail. That's the only way that you can learn. That's the only way that you can do better. Don't be ashamed to ask questions. My lab mentor always encouraged me to ask questions. Not coming from a biology background, I had to learn all this on the go. So he encouraged me to ask questions. So I had to ask, what's the stromal vascular fraction? What's seating? All those basic questions I had to ask. And even though I felt ashamed because everyone was so advanced and they already knew it, he encouraged me to always push myself to always ask questions, regardless of how simple it is. Don't be an introvert. We say that I really had to interact with the people in that lab. It was a very collaborative environment. Everyone helped one another, and you can't just like stay to yourself. So I needed help with different aspects of my project, but fluorescent particles, I had to get it from another grad student. The 3D printing, I had to learn that from another grad student, working with a different material. So I really had to interact with everyone within the lab. And also, it's a good way to network and to get to learn people. And they also enjoy talking about their research as well. Research in grad school isn't for everyone. We worked hard. I would be in the lab on weekends, 3D printing, because those 3D printings take hours to do. And of course, helping other grad students, meeting deadlines, writing proposals, doing all those things, it gets really very hard. And so it's not for everyone, but of course, I discovered that it's for me because I love it. Be ready to do more than you're expected. However much you think you're going to read, you're probably going to read 3 to 4 times more than that. I spent the first 2 weeks headaches. I read so much research papers because I had to catch up with their research and I had to do enough reading for my research project as well. And I had a timeline set for me to complete certain aspects of my research project, and I realized that I don't always meet those deadlines. Sometimes it takes more, which is why I have to go on weekends sometimes to meet certain deadlines. So be ready to do more than you thought you had to do. And sometimes plans change. The original direction that my research was supposed to be on was not how it ended. As we got more information, as we discovered new things, we realized, oh, okay, well, this makes more sense. I think we should go this in this direction. So you have to be really flexible and really open-minded. Special thanks to the Basic Science Institute, which is the program that accepted me. Kathy Will, who was in charge of basically the program, she did an absolute great job. She picked a very diverse group of kids, and she ran the program very well. We also went to seminars and did all those good stuff. The Translational Tissue Engineering Center, my PI, Dr. Warren Grayson, my lab mentor, Ethan Nyberg, and his lab. And Florida Polytechnic University, Dr. Robert Green, my research advisor and my mentor, but Tim Shed, also one of my mentors, is Jean Viviani, who was there to help me through the process of trying to figure out what to do with all of this. Mr. Mustafa, who helps me, because as an international student, there are a lot of processes you have to go through in order to be able to do an internship outside of school. So he was absolutely great with that. And Dr. Miller that gave me the opportunity, that hosted the course online, and that also gave me the opportunity to talk. And National Society of Black Engineers, because I actually met the administrative director for biomedical engineering at a conference that I went to at NSB. And I was able to interact with her, and and she told me as soon as I got to Hopkins to contact her, and I did. And I was able to go to her office, and I was able to talk to her and contact her as well. To look to a question you asked, conferences are very important when it comes to getting internships, because a lot of companies and stuff go to those conferences. A lot of schools as well go to those conferences, and it gives you a chance to basically go on like a mini interview. So you actually come with your resume, dress all nice, and you talk to them and you interact with them. A lot of times, companies that are there from beforehand, so you can do your research beforehand, so you can come there with questions and stuff. And a lot of people throughout have actually gotten internships just by going through these conferences. And that is everything. That's just some of the stuff I read. But that's maybe the stuff that goes with the presentation. And that is all. Anybody has any questions?
I heard that you mentioned that you were a mechanical engineering major, and you were going into very much a biological field with this project. Did you realize how much biology it was, or did you think it was more than you thought it?
I was originally scared because I thought it was going to be a lot of biology. It's not that it wasn't a lot of biology, but it was easier to learn. Looking at it from a more mechanical engineering perspective, it's kind of like, because I know I was working towards a goal, so I had to learn about bone tissue regeneration. Learning that under normal circumstances, I'll probably rack my brain, and it would be very, very hard to grasp the concept. But because I'm looking at it from an engineer who's trying to solve a particular problem, and I need to know this in order to know what parameters I need to change to obtain my goal. I feel that it was much easier to learn. So I learned actually a lot of biology just doing that. And it wasn't that as difficult as I thought it would be. And a lot of people from there are a few people from my lab that have mechanical engineering background that are actually working and that are doing, I guess, a lot of biology.
So I want to go in two directions. The first direction is you found Johns Hopkins, but how did you get there first? In other words, I know Dr. Green worked with you. You did research here at Poly, which was great, which is important because you knew lab techniques, you knew all the other things that made you a good candidate for a research experience like this. But you had options, right? You didn't have to go to Johns Hopkins. You could have went to other places. So maybe give a little bit of context as to why you picked there over other places, which are not necessarily research related, but some of them were. And then also, where does this lead you to your next step?
So I also got accepted to Mayo's Clinic summer research program as well. One of my main reasons for picking Johns Hopkins was that I had control over which lab I get to work in. We get to pick our top 6 lab, and I just so happened to get into my top choice. I was very interested in the research that they were doing because one, I already knew the people in the lab. Some of them were mechanical engineers, and that interests me since I was coming from a background. But also is the way the work that they do closely affected patients, because they actually sit down and meet with physicians and they go over patient scans and they talk about a problem, and you see engineers and scientists sitting down in one room trying to solve this particular problem. I thought that was very interesting as well. And I also picked it because in terms of research environment, for biomedical engineering, it's at least at the time I checked it, it was number one. So the place that you go matters. I figured that if I can go here and I have the chance or the opportunity in grad school to go there, I can basically go anywhere else. You know, like if you went to the top, you can basically go anywhere else. This next step, I really wanted to do this because I wanted to confirm that biomedical engineering is what I wanted to do, but also I wanted to confirm that research route is what I wanted to do. I've been doing research since freshman year, and I've always been excited and interested about it. But especially being around people that are dedicating half a decade to this as well, I needed to see what were they like, how were they coping with it, how were they dealing with things as well. So my eventual goal is to go to grad school, more specifically the PhD route, and definitely tissue engineering.
Thank you.
Question.
One more question. What was your concentration, or what is your concentration?
My concentration is, I think it's called advanced manufacturing materials. I just say material science for that. So, which is also one of the reasons I picked this too, because it closely related to material science. I actually took a class last spring with Dr. Coughlin, organic materials. Because of that class, when they started talking about their PCL material, which is a polymer material, I was able to actually keep up with a lot of what they were saying that particular class. So material science relates to this in a lot of ways, so I didn't feel too out of place.